The council chamber of Shadowcrest Palace had never been so silent. 30 elders from the 12 most powerful packs stood frozen, their eyes locked on the scene unfolding in the training arena below. Through the reinforced glass, they watched as Mira Chen, the Omega girl from the displaced Rivermoon pack, knelt beside the litter of royal cubs. Her movements were slow and deliberate, careful, but not fearful. The cubs belonged to Alpha King Darian Blackwood, the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories. 5 pups, each one a direct heir to the throne, each one already showing the dominant traits that would make them formidable alphas in their own right. 3 months old, and already the size of full-grown timber wolves, they were bundles of muscle, teeth, and pure predatory instinct. "She shouldn't be in there," Elder Rothgar hissed, his weathered hands gripping the observation rail. "Those cubs are royalty. They're not pets. They're weapons in training." Captain Marcus, the king's head of security, a massive beta with scars crossing his face and shoulders that spoke of countless battles, nodded grimly. "The cubs have already injured 2 handlers this week. Both are in the medical wing. One nearly lost her arm to the largest male. But Mira had insisted. The Rivermoon refugees had been clear. If they wanted to remain on Shadowcrest lands, if they wanted the protection and alliance of the strongest pack in the territory after their own pack had been destroyed by rogues, they needed to prove they could integrate into wolf society. That included dealing with royal cubs whose dominance instincts were already fully formed. In the arena, Mira extended her hand toward the smallest cub, a mottled gray and silver youngling that Alpha King Darian had named Ash. He was the runt of the litter, were pushed aside by his larger siblings during feeding times, often sleeping alone while the others piled together for warmth. His crimson eyes tracked her movement with laser focus. "Easy, little one," Mira murmured, her voice barely audible through the intercom system. "I'm not here to hurt you." Ash's lips peeled back, revealing rows of needle-sharp puppy teeth. A low growl rumbled from his chest, a sound that would have sent most Omegas scrambling for the exit in pure instinctive terror. In the observation chamber, several elders stepped backward reflexively. Mira didn't move. She kept her hand extended, palm up, fingers relaxed. Patient. Waiting. "What is she doing?" whispered Dr. Liana, the pack's medical officer, her own Omega instincts screaming at her to intervene, to pull the young Omega girl to safety. "That posture, it signals submission. The cub will attack." "She's going to get herself killed," another elder muttered. "And then the Rivermoon refugees will demand retribution, and we'll have a political disaster." "Wait." The single word cut through the murmuring like a blade. Every head turned toward the speaker. Alpha King Darian Blackwood stood at the back of the observation chamber, having entered so silently that no one had noticed. He was massive even by Alpha standards, 6.5 feet of pure predatory power, such with silver-streaked black hair and eyes that shifted between human brown and wolf gold depending on his mood. Right now, they were gold, focused entirely on the Omega girl in the arena below. "Let her work," he commanded quietly. But his jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. Every instinct in his body was screaming to go down there, to protect the vulnerable Omega from his cubs, from the danger. But something held him back. Curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper he wasn't ready to name. Chapter 2. The Connection. In the arena, Ash didn't attack. Not immediately. He crept forward one massive paw at a time, his movements cautious. His nostrils flared, sampling Mira's scent. The chamber's environmental systems carried the smell to the observation deck sensors. Adrenaline, yes, but also something else. Something the monitoring equipment labeled as contentment pheromones. The young Omega girl was calm. Ash sniffed Mira's fingers, his wet nose cold against her skin. Then, in a movement so fast it was almost invisible, he lunged forward and clamped his jaws around her sleeve. The observation chamber erupted into chaos. "Security team, deploy!" Captain Marcus barked into his communicator. "No, wait. Darian's voice carried absolute authority. "Look at her." Everyone froze again, their attention snapping back to the arena. Mira hadn't screamed. She hadn't pulled away or tried to shake the cub off. Instead, she was tugging back. Not hard, not aggressively, but with steady, playful resistance. Her face broke into a wide smile, and she made a sound that was half laugh, half gentle growl. "What is she doing?" Elder Rothgar whispered, confused and fascinated despite himself. "She's playing," Darian said softly, and something in his chest tightened as he watched. "She's teaching him that she's not prey, but she's also not a threat. She's showing him she can be trusted." In the arena, Ash yanked harder on Mira's sleeve, his tail wagging with excitement. Mira tugged back, letting him pull her slightly off balance before resisting again. The cub's growl shifted in pitch, less threatening, more joyful. The other cubs noticed. One by one, they abandoned their positions around the arena and padded toward Mira. Soon, all 5 were engaged in the game, each trying to grab a piece of her clothing or the equipment harness she wore. Mira laughed, a joyful sound that echoed through the intercom and somehow filled the entire observation chamber with warmth. She released Ash's prize and immediately grabbed at another cub's paw, initiating a gentle wrestling match. The cubs responded with enthusiasm, their earlier aggression transforming into something that looked almost like fun. "Impossible," Captain Marcus breathed. "Those cubs put 2 trained handlers in the medical wing. Yes, and this Omega girl is playing with them." "Not impossible," Darian said quietly, his eyes never leaving Mira. "Look at how she moves. She never presents her throat, never fully exposes her vital organs, but she also never shows fear. She acknowledges their strength without submitting to it." He paused, something shifting in his expression. "She treats them like what they are. Children who need guidance, not monsters to be controlled." Elder Rothgar studied his Alpha King with shrewd eyes. "You sound impressed, Your Majesty." Darian didn't respond, but his hands had relaxed at his sides, and his eyes had shifted back to brown. Human. Soft. Below, Mira had shifted tactics. She'd retrieved a length of rope from her equipment belt and was dragging it across the floor in erratic patterns. Instantly, all 5 cubs gave chase, pouncing and tumbling over each other in their eagerness to catch the prey. Their play growls filled the arena, but there was no real violence in it. Just the exuberant energy of young predators learning to hunt, guided by someone who understood how to channel that energy safely. "How long has she been studying wolf behavior?" Dr. Liana asked, her earlier fear replaced by professional curiosity. "She hasn't," Captain Marcus admitted, checking his data pad. "Her file says she was an Omega caretaker in the Rivermoon Pack nursery before the rogue attack. She helped raise pups. She's applying instincts that come naturally to Omega caregivers, nurturing, playing, teaching through gentleness rather than dominance." "You're saying this is just Omega instinct?" Elder Rothgar's eyebrows rose. "Natural maternal behavior?" "Combined with courage, most wolves don't possess," Darian said, still watching Mira with that intense focus. "Omegas have the instinct to nurture, but most would be too terrified to act on it with royal cubs this dominant. She's different." His voice dropped lower. "She sees past the danger to the children underneath. That takes more than instinct. That takes heart." In the arena, Ash had collapsed onto his back, exhausted from play. Mira knelt beside him and gently scratched the softer fur of his belly, a gesture of trust that would normally result in severe injury from a dominant cub protecting vulnerable areas. But Ash simply yawned, his massive jaws stretching wide, and closed his eyes with a contented sigh. Yet within minutes, all 5 cubs were drowsing around Mira, their bodies relaxed, their breathing steady. She sat among them like a calm center in a storm of predatory potential, her smile never wavering. She looked up at the observation window, seemed to find Darian's eyes through the glass, and gave a small wave. Ash, still drowsy, maintained his grip on her now tattered sleeve, not in aggression, but in contentment. Something in Darian's chest cracked open. Chapter 3. The Aftermath. When Mira finally emerged from the arena 2 hours later, she found Alpha King Darian waiting for her in the corridor outside. Alone. She stopped short, suddenly very aware that she was covered in cub fur. Her clothes were shredded, and she probably smelled like a combination of puppy breath and arena dirt. Not exactly how one wanted to appear before the most powerful alpha in 3 territories. "Your Majesty," she said, and bowing her head in the traditional sign of Omega respect, deeper than before, more formal, the way displaced pack members showed deference to the alpha who'd granted them sanctuary. "Don't!" His voice was rough. "Don't bow to me, not after what you just did." Mira looked up, confused. "I was just doing my job, proving the Rivermoon refugees could integrate. You did more than integrate." Darian stepped closer, his enormous frame somehow not intimidating despite his size. "You connected with my cubs in a way that trained wolf handlers couldn't. You saw them as children, not threats. You treated them with respect and playfulness and—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "And love. They're easy to love," Mira said softly. "Especially Ash. He's so sweet, so gentle despite all that strength." "He's the runt," Darian said, something vulnerable entering his voice. "The others push him aside. I've been worried about him. Worried he wouldn't develop the dominance instincts he needs to survive in a royal pack." "He doesn't need to be dominant to survive," Mira said, and there was steel beneath her gentle tone. "He needs to be loved, to be seen, to know that being the smallest doesn't make him less valuable." She met Darian's eyes directly, a bold move for an Omega, especially one from a displaced pack with no standing, but she didn't seem to care about protocol. "Strength isn't just about size and aggression, Your Majesty. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is be gentle, to show vulnerability, to trust." Darian stared at her, and something shifted in his expression. Something that made Mira's breath catch. "You're remarkable," he said quietly. "Do you know that?" "I'm just an Omega who's good with pups," Mira said, trying to deflect the intensity of his gaze. "It's what Omegas do." "You're an Omega who taught my cubs how to play, who showed them that not everything is a dominance challenge, who made them feel safe enough to sleep in your presence." He took another step closer. "Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious?" Mira's heart hammered. "Your Majesty—" "Darian," he interrupted. "When we're alone, I'm just Darian." "That's not appropriate. Neither is what I'm about to ask you." His hand came up, hovering near her cheek but not quite touching. "Stay. Not just for today. Not just as a Rivermoon refugee proving your pack's worth. Stay in the palace, while work with my cubs, teach them what you know." Mira's breath caught. "Why?" "Because they need you." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "Because in 2 hours you gave them something I've been trying to give them for 3 months. Joy, safety, the freedom to just be children." He paused, and his eyes shifted to that molten gold that meant his wolf was close to the surface. "And because I haven't been able to look away from you since you walked into that arena. Yet because watching you smile and laugh and play with my cubs did something to me I can't explain. Because my wolf recognized something in you that I'm only just beginning to understand." Mira stared at him, heart racing. "You don't know me. Then let me." His hand finally made contact, cupping her cheek with a gentleness that contradicted his massive size. "Let me get to know the Omega girl who sees monsters as children, who plays with predators and makes them feel safe, who tugs back when they bite and smiles while doing it. The Council will never approve. I'm the Alpha King. The Council approves what I tell them to approve." His thumb stroked her cheekbone. "But I'm not commanding you, Mira. I'm asking, stay. Give me a chance to prove that not all alphas see Omegas as lesser. That some of us are smart enough to recognize when we've found something extraordinary. Mira looked into his eyes. This powerful alpha who was asking instead of demanding. Who was vulnerable instead of dominant. Who was looking at her like she was precious instead of weak. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." Darian's smile was like sunrise, breaking through storm clouds. Chapter 4. The Courtship. The next 3 months transformed both Mira's life and the palace itself. She moved into quarters in the royal wing, close to the cubs' nursery. Every morning, or she'd wake to the sound of small paws scratching at her door. 5 royal cubs who'd decided she was theirs and wouldn't be convinced otherwise. Ash was her constant shadow, following her everywhere, sleeping curled against her legs at night, despite having his own perfectly comfortable den. But the cubs weren't the only ones seeking her out. Darian found excuses to be wherever she was, checking on the cubs' progress, asking her opinion on pack matters, inviting her to walk in the gardens after dinner. The court noticed. Of course they noticed. "The Alpha King is courting an Omega," the whispers went. "A displaced Omega girl at that. She has no pack standing, no family left after the rogues, no proper rank. But she has his cubs' hearts, and perhaps his as well." Mira tried to ignore the gossip, but it was hard when she could smell the disapproval from certain elders, feel the weight of suspicious stares from wolves who thought a refugee Omega had no business catching their king's eye. Until the night Darian invited her to join him for the full moon run. "It's a royal tradition," he explained as they stood on the palace balcony, watching the moon rise. "The Alpha King runs with his mate and cubs under the first full moon of spring." "But you don't have a mate," Mira said carefully. "No," Darian agreed, his eyes finding hers. "But I'd like to run with you anyway, if you'll come." "I'm just an Omega," Mira said softly. "The others will talk. Let them talk." He stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "You understand my cubs better than any wolf in this territory. You've shown them more love in 3 months than most of the court has in their entire lives. So run with us. Let me show you what it means to be part of my pack, part of my life." That night Mira ran through the forest surrounded by wolves, Darian in his massive silver-black form, 5 cubs tumbling and playing around her legs, and a dozen pack members who'd chosen to join their alpha's unorthodox run. She couldn't keep up with their speed, of course. Omegas were built for endurance, not the explosive sprints of alphas and betas. But they slowed for her, circled back when she fell behind, and when she finally collapsed laughing in a moonlit meadow, they piled around her in a heap of warm fur and contentment. Darian shifted back to human form, unconcerned with his nakedness in the way of wolves, and knelt beside her. "Thank you," he said softly, brushing grass from her hair. "For what?" "For showing me what I was missing. For reminding me that strength isn't just about dominance and control. That sometimes the most powerful thing a leader can do is play, to laugh, to let go." He leaned closer, his breath warm against her face. "For making me feel something I thought died with my first mate, something I never thought I'd find again." "Darian," Mira's breath caught. "I'm in love with you," he said simply. "I know it's fast. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is complicated. But watching you with my cubs, seeing you smile, hearing you laugh, I'm in love with you, Mira Chen, and I want to know if there's any possibility you might feel the same." Mira looked at this Alpha King who'd given her everything. Safety when her pack was destroyed, purpose when she felt useless, so a home when she'd lost everything, a family in the form of 5 rambunctious cubs. And she realized she'd been falling for him since the moment he'd defended her decision to enter that arena. Since he'd watched her with such intensity and respect. Since he'd asked instead of commanded. "I love you too," she whispered. Darian's kiss was gentle despite his size, reverent despite his strength. When they broke apart, 5 cubs were watching with interest. And Ash had somehow wedged himself between them, demanding attention. Jealous? Mira laughed, scratching behind Ash's ears. He knows a good thing when he sees it, Darien said, pulling both Mira and the cub into his arms. Smart wolf. Epilogue. 6 months later, Mira woke to familiar weight on her chest and the sound of soft snoring. She opened her eyes to find Ash sprawled across her, now significantly larger, but still convinced he was small enough to use her as a bed. The other 4 cubs were piled around the massive bed she now shared with Darien. The bed in the Alpha King's personal chambers, where she'd lived for 3 months as his officially recognized mate. Darien lay beside her, one arm draped possessively over her waist, his face relaxed in sleep. The formal mating ceremony had been beautiful, a blend of royal tradition and the simpler rituals of the Rivermoon refugees, honoring both what she'd gained and what she'd lost. Half the court had been in tears, and the other half grudgingly admitted that maybe the displaced Omega Girl wasn't such a terrible choice for their king after all. Especially after she'd helped mediate a territorial dispute by literally playing with the cubs of both alpha families until the adults felt too ridiculous to keep fighting. "You're staring," Darien murmured, eyes still closed but mouth curving into a smile. "You're beautiful when you sleep." "I'm terrifying when I sleep. Marcus says I still growl." Terrifyingly beautiful." Mira leaned over Ash to kiss him. "The cubs want breakfast. The cubs always want breakfast." But Darien was already sitting up, gently moving Ash aside despite the cubs' protests. "Come on, you beast. Let's feed you before you eat your mother." The casual use of mother made Mira's heart swell. The cubs had started calling her that a month ago, and Darien had adopted it immediately. As they herded 5 hungry cubs toward the royal dining hall, Mira thought about that day in the arena. About Ash biting her sleeve and her instinctive response to tug back with a smile, instead of fear. That moment had changed everything. She'd found a home, a family, a mate who saw her as an equal, who valued her for exactly who she was. And she'd taught a kingdom that sometimes the most powerful response to aggression isn't more aggression. Sometimes it's a smile and a playful tug. Sometimes it's choosing to see the frightened child beneath the teeth. Sometimes it's an Omega Girl showing an Alpha King what love really means.